All right, I think we're going to get started. Thanks everyone for coming out for Kickstarting Innovation in the Museum. Basically, you know, we talk a lot at this conference, or at least the sessions I've been to, about wanting to be innovative and really push our museums forward in one way or another. And I think that a lot of us are also talking about, well, what really makes that happen, and so what we wanted to do is, it's not that we are coming here and saying, oh, we're the most innovative, although unless we're just talking in funny voices or something. So this is more about what we wanted to do is just start the conversation. It's something that I think the four of us think about a lot, and I'm sure a lot of you think about it a lot too. And we sat back and thought about, well, what are things that we've seen work in our institution, and tried to kind of unpack what's going on and untangle, and try to kind of come up with broad things that we think actually help us get things done. And it might be something different for each one of our institutions, or it might be something that I think one thing we also want to really explore is that what works for different people. So what our hope is right here is to kind of, I have four people here, Erica from SFMOMA and Tim from SFMOMA, and you can introduce with titles when you come up, and Don from the Met, and talk about what we've seen work in our institutions, and kind of try and abstract it, and what are the concepts that we think, you know, we can work with. And then hopefully, if we don't talk too long, we'd really like to kind of, you know, get it on a Google Doc, what we think those themes are, and hear from you, of what themes have worked for you, and kind of just make sure that we can get beyond, like, really think about innovation and get beyond it being a frustrating experience. I think it can be frustrating sometimes, and what can we do to really make it happen? Strategies and tactics and all that good stuff. So we are going to start out with Tim.
Go. All right. Thank you, Liz. Thanks, everyone, for coming. I'm Tim Svenonius of SFMOMA. The spaces that we inhabit have a profound influence on our emotional and psychological states. Because we work in museums, or those of us who don't work in museums spend a lot of time in them, and we're well acquainted with spaces that are engineered to produce profound emotional and you know, a range of emotional experiences. And yet, we probably mostly work in traditional office spaces and cubes. These are pictures of offices at SFMOMA. The creativity, this one too. The creativity guru, Tina Seelig, says that cubicles were designed to emulate prison cells. I'm not entirely sure what her source was, but it's true that descriptions of the panopticon prison, as described by the philosopher Jeremy Bentham, they evoke more than anything in our modern world cubicles. A cubicle is designed for a single person to occupy in solitary confinement. It's highly inflexible furniture. It's very difficult to adapt a cubicle to do anything aside from its intended purpose. More pictures of offices at SFMOMA. If you show empty architectural spaces to creative types, to artists, their gears will begin to turn. They may start to think about what they could do with a wall or a room or a hallway, but in order to transform a space, we need a sense of ownership. Ownership of the space is what will empower us to manipulate it and alter it. If you work in a space where you feel you're trespassing, then you're less likely to make any marks, and you're more likely to try to leave spaces exactly as you found them, and being mindful of doing nothing destructive. One of the challenges we face is how to work in new ways and think in new ways within inflexible and non-adaptable spaces. Periodically, we borrow meeting spaces from our partners and collaborators in the Bay Area. And this is a picture of a work area at Stanford's D School with a couple of SFMOMA employees in it. one of the things that we find is that even in these cases where we are trespassing on somebody else's territory, that a properly adaptable space can be swiftly configured to meet one's purposes, and it in no way inconveniences people who come in after you. They can just as easily be returned to a previous state. A poster produced by the San Francisco firm DEGW about optimal workspaces shows a combination of individual spaces, which are represented in blue, the group workspaces that are like collaborative spaces, which are in green, and the enclosed team-owned spaces in orange. And it talks about a variety of different types of companies who use space in different ways. But all of them emphasize flexible furniture, things like desks, movable desks, which can be pushed together into tables, benches which double as work surfaces, things which can be stacked and pushed to the side, and so on. They're, in the same document, they have something called the 10 Rules of Agile Space. And one of them is they call the tinkerer effect. And the way that I perceive this, the way that I've incorporated the idea of the tinkerer effect into my own work, is that this idea that if the very first thing that you do when you begin a meeting is to configure it for your purposes, then you've already begun problem solving, and you've begun problem solving with your hands. And that this primes us for other kinds of thinking and other kinds of problem solving that we're likely to do in our meetings. But thus far, I've only really talked about the back of house spaces, and I will also want to talk about our public spaces. The case that I want to talk about unfolds over a period of about 6 years. This photo is of our Visitor Education Center, which opened in 2003. And the space itself is heavily programmed with films and lectures and classes, family programs, and so forth. But it had these two hallways which were empty most of the time. And so we commandeered these hallways to be our kind of an exhibition laboratory. And this story unfolds over, basically starting in 2007 and runs up to the present. The first exhibition that we installed there was called A Hidden Picasso, and this centered around one single painting that is in SFMOMA's collection, a Picasso from 1900 that X-rays revealed had a very different painting hidden beneath the surface. The exhibition was organized by a former conservator from SFMOMA, Will Shank, for the Guggenheim Bilbao, but the show had no U.S. venue. When it ended in Bilbao and the painting came back to San Francisco, then we basically recreated the exhibition only in didactic material, because we couldn't put art in the visitor education space for various reasons. There's no light control, we didn't have security there. And so really not very far from where a short walk from where the painting was actually installed, then you had this story told in didactic panels. There's a light box that shows the X-ray, and the story kind of culminates in a color reconstruction of what the painting might have looked like before he painted over it. And we ran into a bunch of challenges here. One, namely that the fabric walls, which are great for sticking pins into, really didn't support very much weight. So it was challenging to hang those light boxes and run power to them on these walls that were really not designed to support art. The following year, an exhibition called the 1000 Journals Project was organized by Stephanie Pao, now of MoMA. And for this exhibition, it was imperative that the walls be resurfaced with drywall so they could bear the load. They would behave more like gallery walls. And in the meantime, we had this signals a change in that we actually were displaying artwork in the hallway. It just happens to be artwork that you can touch and interact with and even manipulate. The story is that the 1,000 Journals project was conceived by a local artist designer named Brian Singer, who sort of sent these 1,000 blank journals into the world with the instruction that they be passed from one person to the next until they're full, at which point they would be returned to him. And this exhibition gave us that an opportunity to showcase these kind of highlights from those journals, as well as allowing people to draw and write in the unfinished journals. And here are some visitors manipulating the title wall. A couple more examples. The red phone here connected visitors to a voicemail box so they could respond to the question written on the chalkboard, which we updated every couple of weeks. Another exhibition organized by Stephanie Powell was Dispatches from the Archives, which displayed a survey of exhibition and event posters produced by SFMOMA over its entire history. So over time, you see sort of a rise in the level of professionalism with which these exhibitions are installed. There's much kind of greater involvement and investment from the graphic design department and from the installation department. Now, the most recent of these, which Erica will talk a lot more about, is ArtGomeLob, which ran this year. And one of the things, so in just, that very quick overview shows you 6 years in which we went from an underutilized space, which became the basis for a whole stream of programming that originated not from curatorial, but from interpretation. And we turned that hallway into something that we could experiment with, a little laboratory, and have learned quite a lot over the years from doing that. If there's a downside to sort of raising the bar and raising the level of polish, it's that this is no longer regarded as an unwanted orphaned space. This is now desirable exhibition space, and now interpretation is not, it's not our domain anymore. And now there's
gentrified.
So currently there's an architecture and design exhibition in that same corridor. So, but really one of the things that I would recommend, I mean, if this is interesting to you, pay attention to, pay critical attention to those orphaned spaces, the unwanted spaces around your institution. And, really think about what they could become. There's a fire exit pretty much exactly like this one that we recently transformed into a space we call Write, Draw, Reflect, Share. And this space invites people, we provide pencils and blank postcards and invite visitors to draw images that are inspired by what they've seen that day at the museum. And we post them on the wall here or on online, on Facebook. And so we've taken yet another uncharismatic orphaned space and transformed it into something that inspires kids and adults to be creative. So thank you.
Awesome.
Just get yours up.
Cool. Ooh. PowerPoint is opening. Spending color.
Sing the lollipop song while we wait.
Hey, there we go. Oh, presenter mode.
Yep.
Okay. Good, good. Okay. So I'm going to speak about a project that some of you may have heard me talk about before I presented about it at Museums on the Web this past time around, called ArtGomeLob, which was a crowdsourced games exhibition that I curated at SFMOMA in the Correct Visitor Education Center hallway. But first I just kind of want to acknowledge that innovation can be frightening. It can feel like there are strange creatures sort of lurking in unknown territories outside the boundary area of our understanding and experience. But I also think that when we go off the map, that's when we have the opportunity to make exciting discoveries. If something's not frightening, it's probably also not entirely new. So ArtGomeLob was a crowdsourced games experiment. I put out an open call in September 2011, in the summer of 2011, for simple games that could be played by visitors of all ages. It wasn't just for children, which a lot of the time games in museums are kind of relegated to the family programs domain. And I wanted to look at games in museums as something that could be an all ages experience. So I received 50 proposals from my local creative community, and of those I selected 5 simple paper-based games to produce and exhibit. And one of the main goals of the project, other than kind of providing a platform for critical dialogue about games that I felt was missing in the Bay Area, surprisingly, was that I really wanted to push innovation at my museum. So I wanted to visibly, in the physical space of the museum, in something that looked like a formal exhibition space, incorporate outside voices. I wanted to try out new ways of engaging with our public outside of kind of under the radar experiments that were already taking place. And I wanted to really prove internally as well as externally that a project like this could function, that we could do something like that and that it would be a success, or at least see what would happen if we tried something like this. So why games exactly? First of all, games are a great tool for interactive learning in the museum. When we're playing a game, we're learning things implicitly as well as explicitly. We're understanding things through gameplay other than the things that are being kind of verbally communicated to us. And I think that there are a lot of interesting parallels between a game and a museum visit as far as rules, as far as the content, as far as the hidden narrative, as far as the structure goes. And so I was interested in exploring those. But games are also incredibly hot right now. Everybody's talking about games. Everybody's talking about what they can do with games as educational tools, what they can do with games in marketing. Games actually in some countries have overtaken film as the highest grossing form of media. So games are a big deal, but it's also a medium that's at a pretty serious crossroads right now. And I think that it's a crossroads where the medium is actually going to go out in every single direction from that crossroads. And so I think it's a really important time to be looking at every corner of that crossroads. And finally, I was actually surprised that while there's a really large kind of city as playground niche community in the Bay Area, there isn't a lot of critical dialogue about games. There are basically 2 camps. There are people who are kind of meeting up and playing games off the radar, and then there are people who are working at big game companies. And as far as kind of exploring games as an art form, I didn't really feel that there was a kind of central platform for having discussions. And so one of the other goals of the project was to kind of reach out to that niche community. Mm-hmm. So the 5 games that we ended up producing were of 5 distinct types. We had an alternate reality game, a multiplayer online game, a role-playing game, a sort of reverse charades parlor game, and a word game. And they were all paper-based. And this was actually as surprising to me as it may be to some of you that all the games in this experiment were paper-based. I was open to digital games, but I actually found that a lot of the proposals that I received for analog games were just more inventive. And I also felt that doing something that was paper-based was kind of outside the vocabulary of the commercial games industry. And SFMOMA is right across the street from the Moscone Center, where they have the Game Developers Conference every year. I feel like there is a fair amount of dialogue around digital games happening, and so I wanted to try to kind of step away from that. So just to kind of talk about the games for a second, we had an alternate reality game called The Peculiar Scholarship of Dr. Bedcannon. It was an interactive narrative that actually led visitors through SFMOMA's permanent collection and unpacked secrets of the collection to expose what was called the xenoteric properties of some of the artworks in the collection. And so it was kind of your standard ancient aliens, ley lines, crop circles, conspiracy theory, as mapped onto SFMOMA's permanent collection from the perspective of a conspiracy theorist curator who's no longer on staff. No. Sadly. No. And so then we had a local games group called Situate create a game called Supergoing, which was a multiplayer online game that also had a paper-based component for this exhibition where they assigned missions to people to play in or to complete inside the museum. People would post documentation of their completion of the missions to to the Supergoing website, but then people could also create missions for other visitors to complete. So, mission 237, bring a strange object to SFMOMA, check it into the code, check and document. That was a mission that a Supergoing player invented, and then somebody else completed with this lightsaber. And we had, critique a work of art using facial expressions. We had, create your own version of an SFMOMA artwork. It could be an exact copy or an interpretation. Basically a wide range of things that people could do, and also a kind of vibrant online community springing up around this game. So we had a performance game that was sort of like reverse charades. Every time you saw, read, or overheard, every time you read, overheard, or thought one of 12 kind of key art terms, you had to make a motion that was associated with that term. And a win state of the game was when you'd made all 12 motions. And so we had people walking around the galleries, communicating with each other through motion. And then we had this role-playing game in which visitors would roll dice to select a character and then actually explore the museum through that character's eyes and complete a series of kind of tasks that were based on that character's reasons for coming to the museum. So, I want to point out that, ArtGomeLob was an analog on-site experiment, but I think that there are a lot of kind of aspects of innovative practices that the exhibition attempted that can port to the digital and can port to the online as well. So, as far as innovation goes, you've been on a long journey, but you've always had the tools you need to innovate. And, I think the main thing is just conditions for innovation. You've got spaces that nobody else wants. You can, look for a little corner you can grow in, like moss that's growing in a crack on a wall that, nobody in their right mind should be able to hold on in. And, then look for a medium and a format that provides the same types of opportunities, something where you can push the boundaries, something where maybe people aren't paying as much attention, or maybe something where nobody's taken up the mantle yet. Nobody's inhabiting that space yet. And of course you need to get internal buy-in. You don't need a big budget necessarily or a lengthy planning timeline, but you do need for somebody to give you permission, whoever you work for, to just say, well, that doesn't sound that bad, go ahead. And you need for the people who work with you at the museum to support you in whatever way they're going to need to support you. If it's marketing the exhibition, or marketing the project, whatever your project is, if it's graphic design, if it's, in my case, it was mostly graphic design and the installation crew. And, finally, you need dedication. I mean, you want to do this. You really want to do this. And so you need to be prepared to spend the time and energy to make it happen, to get it off the ground, but you also need to figure out how to then take this kind of project and incorporate it into your ordinary workflow so that you're not, creating projects where the budget is no cost but staff time, because that's a dangerous, dangerous thing. So another thing that you already have is local creative community. There are so many cool things going on where you live. And I live in San Francisco. The list is pretty much endless, but I just kind of wanted to point out Journey to the End of the Night was created by the same guys who created Supergoing for ArtGomeLob. And so this is a citywide race It's kind of like a zombie chase that happens every year around Halloween. You know, the Institute for Aesthetics, it's a Fluxus-based performance group. They basically invent their own sports as a form of performance, and they are an incredible group. And they created I Know What I Like for ArtGomeLob. You know, we have the Come Out and Play Festival in San Francisco. A lot of these people were involved in events around ArtGomeLob from the beginning. And then, of course, we had a really popular alternate reality game called the Games of Nonchalance in San Francisco. And their successors were the ones who created the peculiar scholarship of Dr. Bedcanon for us. So another thing that you already have is a Zen attitude. You really need to distance yourself from expectations of what the project is going to be like. Just try something out. You've got an interesting idea. You don't know what the result is going to be. Experiment with it. You know, so ArtGomeLob, for example, was an open call. I had this idea about what we wanted to do. I didn't know what kind of games were going to come out of it, and I was surprised just like everybody else. But, you know, another important point is to really, you know, dial it in where it counts. Make sure that you adhere to some kind of institutional standards so that you can continue to keep windows like this open in the future. So another thing that you have is open-ended dialogue, or the capacity for open-ended dialogue. What ArtGomeLob ended up being more than anything else was a platform for discussion. It was a place where we definitely had more questions than answers. I'm not an expert on games. I don't know, you know, I don't know everything, but what I wanted to do was create a space where people could talk about the issues surrounding this medium right now. And so we had, in April, kind of midway through the exhibition, a panel discussion where we brought together artists, game designers, theorists. There's a curator who works exclusively with games. And we had a discussion with about 100 visitors, and we had a live Twitter feed going as part of the discussion, and there's a link to the Storify of that Twitter on screen right now. And it was a fascinating discussion, and I think that a lot of people got to unpack a lot of the really thorny issues around the medium. So another thing that you have is people who aren't you. And honestly, people who aren't you are a great resource for innovating because they think things that you've never thought of. So seriously, so keep crowdsourcing, hand things over to your community. ArtGomeLob included a game design station where people could actually make up their own games. One of my favorites was this visitor-designed game that basically, you know, talks about how we're always sort of playing games in the museum or playing games in our own lives. There are kind of implicit sets of rules and objectives that are at play all the time. But we also had a day-long game design workshop as part of the exhibition where people could actually come, learn principles of game design from people who think about this stuff all the time and then develop their own games and prototype them in the galleries with visitors. So that was really exciting. And so we just spent the morning kind of learning and developing, and the afternoon prototyping and iterating, and then reporting back. And I don't think that either of the games that came out of that project are games that we're going to be producing on a large scale, but it was a wonderful exercise, and I think that visitors appreciated it too. And then finally, there are also people who are not in your institution who may be able to take your idea and run with it. So a colleague from the Milwaukee Art Museum came out to ArtGomeLob while it was up and asked me if I minded if she took the idea of developing games and kind of ran with it for her teen program. And so her teen program recently developed a Truth or Dare kind of mission-based game that they executed at an evening event. And so it's pretty exciting to see these ideas kind of moving into other institutions. And finally, you have questions. You have tons of questions. And you know, I always wonder, you know, I'm excited about innovating. I'm excited about my new idea. Do my visitors care? You know, is anybody going to care? And so we did some evaluation of ArtGomeLob, and we discovered, you know, pretty much nothing too surprising. A lot of the participants were self-identified gamers in their 20s and 30s. That was kind of the biggest group who came to ArtGomeLob and got excited about it and came to our panels and whatnot. But we also had families. We had a lot of people say that it was fun, which was also not surprising. But you know, we found that a lot of people who played took a lot of time to play, which was really cool. We had people staying in the exhibition, or taking the instruction cards and going out into the galleries for up to 45 minutes in the largest group, and then over 45 minutes, which was amazing. And even non-participants still thought that games were a good way to spend time in a museum, and it was more about why they'd come, that they didn't want to spend time doing it that day, but they were excited about it in general. And so I think kind of looking at that, we can see that people really appreciated it, and that the people who participated felt that it had value, which was rewarding. And so as far as what we gained, I think it enabled us to expand our program in a new way, to try something out with games that hadn't really been tried before, and also to receive recognition from game and tech communities for doing a project like this. And hopefully the relationships that we developed with these game theory people and game designers and artists who are using games as a medium will be partnerships that we'll be able to continue and nurture. And finally, I think that we've paved the way for projects like this to happen in the future, the next time somebody has an idea like this that they feel passionately enough about to spend their own time doing it, But I just also, oh shoot, something happened with the layout of this here. So I was gonna, do what?
You innovated it.
I innovated it, exactly. Okay, so anyway, I had a bunch of links on screen, but I think it got all wacky. So I'll just kind of leave you with that. So we had a bunch of press about the exhibition, and I think some of it you can see there, and I'll post it somewhere. Okay, cool. So that's it for ArtGomeLob. Thank you.
Awesome. Can you help me with the thingy? Tim's going to help me get the thingy up. While he's doing that, hey everybody, I'm Undeen. I'm the manager of the Media Lab at the Met. Hey everybody out there in TV land. How's it going? Hey, I've always wanted to do this. I'm Conan O'Brien.
All right.
I did it. Big time. My name in lights. Showbiz, folks. Hey, so you want to innovate. All right. Let me tell you a little story. Man, I'm on fire. So, we did, I'm going to basically tell a story about a particular thing we did at the Met that I think was pretty innovative, and then from that one event I'm going to draw a whole raft of principles that you can apply to absolutely anything, because that's how it works. So this was what we called a 3D scanning and printing hackathon. It came about originally because we had MRI scanned a mummy at NYU. We managed to digitally extract the information, some digital amulets from inside the mummy without opening it up. We went to MakerBot and they printed up these little amulets in plastic that were inside of the mummy that were never ever going to come out of the mummy. And we thought that was really awesome. We wanted to somehow share that the whole process with people at the Met. Didn't really work out to use that data, but then we discovered this software that lets you turn regular camera pictures into digital models, and then you can print these things on 3D printers. So it's all of a sudden, anybody can come into the galleries with their camera, take a picture of your sculpture, take it home, play with it, and then print it, all using free software and low-cost hardware. So we thought that was really cool. So what we did was we formed a partnership with the company MakerBot, who makes these printers, connected it with a bunch of artists in our community, and basically we walked around the galleries. The artists met with curators. The curators talked about their favorite objects in their collection. The artists photographed these models from all sides. We loaded it into this software called 12-3D Catch. It's free. You can download it. take about this many pictures of an object, load it into the software, and it generates this three-dimensional model. The software figures out where all the camera positions are. And then, you can make neat little movies like this. You can export it. We thought that was really cool. This is going to make you sick. So I'll get off of that as soon as it accepts my click. Okay, good. So then the artist spent 2 days in one of our studios at the Met with loads of food provided by MakerBot. They hacked on those models with their tools using free apps and non-free apps. These artists came from all over the world. They're real experts in this kind of stuff. But they were also using software tools that are pretty darn accessible because I think I can even use them now. We printed these models on 3D printers that were brought in by MakerBot Industries. Here's a picture of one of the printers in action printing one of our mashups, like 2 different sculptural heads mashed together. They made things like Marsyas and the Swan. Can I lead in the Swan with Marsyas? To create Marsyas and the Swan. Created the hooded Marsyas by combining the face with the shrouded woman whose name I always forget. I think that looks very Emperor Palpatine, so I like that a lot. They even took an armless Durga who somewhere along the way had lost her arms and gave her puppet arms. All the models that we did that day were uploaded to the site called Thingiverse. Thingiverse is like sort of the Flickr of 3D models. People upload their models, download them, modify other people's models, re-upload them, share them. All those derivatives are sort of tracked, so you can find out what someone did with your model. So it's a really neat, and when we uploaded all of our models, there were links back to our website, so we encourage people to learn more about the objects. People made Pez dispenser heads out of one of our Buddha heads, and somebody, this is somewhere in the world, like basically while this was happening, did this. There we go. Did this. So they took a downsampled versions of a variety of heads that we had, wrote a processing sketch that took the audio input that you're hearing and used that to morph the heads in real time. What I like about it is, okay, you can like it or not like it, but what's neat about it is we just had no idea that this was going to happen from this event. And when I think about all the different activities that had to happen for that head to occur, oh sweet, I can just let that music keep playing. Innovation, folks. Showbiz. So when I think about that head, right? Someone took these pictures. Like 5 different people took pictures of these 5 different heads. Somebody else uploaded them. Somebody else provided the software to let people de-res those images so they were workable. Someone created this processing programming language. Someone else brought this all together in ways that we never would have occurred to us. But it happened because we shared. And that was really exciting to me and a great example of, when we share our information in our collections, we're open about our processes. Really neat things can happen that we wouldn't have expected otherwise. So that was more or less how the event went down. We got some good press for us, and we learned a lot. Our education department has learned quite a bit about it. We're really excited. So I guess I want to move to talk about general principles of what I think it took to make this work. This event was sort of my first time doing. I was new to this position after being sort of a guy in a cube for a long time, being put in a leadership role. This is a first for me. My general tendency, right, is like, oh, I want to do something awesome. I just want to push it out there by myself. I just want to kick it. I just want to kick it, and just because there's this attitude, oh, the Met's really conservative, and no one really wants to try anything, and we've got to be really careful about what everything means. And as I talked to people, I realized it was something that everybody seemed to think that everyone else thought, but no one thought themselves. So it wasn't nearly as hard as I thought to bring these together. So my main point of how to do innovation, at least from my perspective, where I was coming from, is this. Anybody? Anybody? Anybody at all know who that is? Yeah, but who is that? That's right, Showtime synergy. Synergy, ladies and gentlemen. That's right, thank you. Thank you. Which is great because the whole thing is synergy, right? It's like you Showtime synergy, and she would project these holograms. So it was about projecting this image that you wanted people to see. So maybe it's something in there. So the whole point was like the way we did it. So I'm going to say this is the way you should do it because it's just a better better form of speech for me to use. The way you should do it is to synergize all of your interests. You find the communities that you want to bring together, and you find the internal parties that have a need, and you find a way to describe this awesome thing that you really want to do in terms that they understand. And you listen to them and you modify what your plan is so that it works for the most amount of people, so people are really happy with it. And the reason you want to do this, so you don't look like a bunch of misfits. Truly, truly, truly outrageous. Because innovation is contagious, outrageous. Met is our name, no one else is the same. Met is my name. So one of the things that we did was we worked really closely with education. Now this is not actually from our hackathon, this is from the AIC, but it's a really awesome picture of MakerBots and kids together because children are the future. And if it's for the children, like no one really is going to stand against you. And I didn't really market it. I mean, I didn't have to convince education. The thing is, education is doing really cool, innovative stuff all the time. They just weren't doing it with like this particular gear and with this particular idea that Jonathan DeHaan and I had for doing this. But when I shared it with them, they got really excited. And what they helped me do was to explain that this kind of activity, right, looking at an object in the collection, bringing artists in to do stuff, taking an object and hacking it, or taking inspiration from it and doing something new and sharing that is not new at all in our museum and probably not in yours. So it wasn't like totally outlandish. So it was very easy to work with them to help us couch it in terms that everybody understood. So, and they're the ones who helped us understand how to talk to to communications and security, how to physically arrange a space that like a lot of you guys said wasn't like a space with on a pedestal that everyone was looking at, but sort of a space that you could use that was a little kind of low stakes. So finding a stakeholder like that was really important. The other big thing was working with the artists. I tried to find like the greasiest hippie artist that we had there because we called the thing a hackathon, right? And everyone's like, oh no, you're gonna break our matrices, the artists, they're crazy, who knows what they're gonna do? They're gonna desecrate our art, because you don't want artists in an art museum. That's nothing good has ever come from artists. So we did a lot of like this hedging our bets against what we thought the artists might think, right? So we had them we had this list of approved objects that they were allowed to scan. Even though like we allow photography all over the place, you can go into the galleries and shoot objects as a private person. We were really really careful about making sure that no one got no curators or internal people were felt like they were getting stepped on or anything like that. So we had approved objects. We had them sign documents that made them understand that we weren't acquiring their works just because they were printing them. So there's lots of stuff like that that ultimately turned out not to matter that much. And the reason it didn't matter that much is because we worked with curators who are apparently not the enemy, which is my very first MCN. I got nervous and I said that on stage. It was awkward. But I've learned that they're not. I learned the curators are awesome. And some curators are awesome. This curator is awesome. Eric Chelgren and a bunch of others. I'm sure they're all awesome. We just identified ones that I happen to know now are awesome. One of the things we did is we took all the artists through these different galleries, and they met with the curators who were really excited about this stuff, or we could convince them to show up and do it. And they talked about what was interesting about their collections. They talked about some of the cultural issues around some of these objects. So like, maybe don't do weird stuff with this particular thing, because this actually kind of means stuff to people, so you might hurt some feelings. So I'm just helping the artists understand, like, oh, I don't know this culture, right? I don't know what the context is of this particular deity sculpture. Who knows? There actually are religions that still like this guy. So you don't want to hurt people's feelings. And helping the artists understand that was important. But more importantly, the artists really engaged with the stories that the curators were telling about these objects. They didn't just take these forms and use them in their own way. They listened to the stories from the curators and built something out of it that was based on those stories. That was really neat. So that to me was the big surprise. I did not expect that at all. I thought that this part was just going to be sort of a formality to keep the curators appeased, and that was like, you know, a humbling moment for me, and really challenged a lot of my assumptions as I went into this. So that was. If I had a principle from there, it's like be prepared to be surprised and leave room for that kind of surprise, because really amazing things could happen. One of the big challenges was working with a vendor, right? As a museum, we're very, in some ways, conservative, definitely slow to take on change, and that's probably a good thing. We think over our decisions very carefully because our decisions could have ramifications that last for hundreds of years. So it matters, right? A quick startup industry like MakerBot, you know, can change on a dime. They want to promote stuff fast. If they want to switch from one, you know, focusing on one sector to another, they can fire half of their staff and hire a PR firm if they wanted to, so to speak. So it was a challenge, right, to figure out how to get our communications department to understand where this MakerBot was coming from and build something that worked for both of us. I mean, even calling the thing a 3D printing and scanning hackathon and not the MakerBot hackathon, all those sort of issues were coming up. And I think we did a pretty good job of resolving that. I think maybe next time we'll do a bit of a better job. But again, you know, it wasn't as hard as we expected to make a vendor like MakerBot understand where we were coming from. They worked with us really well when we talked about our concerns. And additionally, I think we did a good job of helping our communications department and other internal staff understand that MakerBot isn't just a vendor, right? They're a focal point for a whole community of artists and makers who do stuff with their gear and not with their gear. They run the Thingiverse site. So they're a community hub, and engaging with that and engaging with communities like that sometimes means engaging with a private company as well. So figuring out how to make that happen, getting your institution to be a little more flexible, that was my biggest challenge. I think we did okay. And I guess one of the other important things that I criticize myself for a lot is the following up aspect, right? Like, what happened? I have a wet wagon. So if I was going to be really critical about the way we did it, I think we hedged more for failure than we planned for success. Looking back on it, I mean, we had a blogging plan. We blogged about it in advance. We had bloggers there. We did, you know, we took photography of the event as people were going around. But it was a little bit more ad hoc than I would have liked it to have been. We didn't really have a kick-ass documentation plan in place. Like halfway through the event, I realized, oh, crap. All these artists are using all of this software. I would really like to know what this is after the fact. And I quick run around doing a survey of every artist and what tools they're using, hardware and software, to lock all of it down. I should have known that in advance, and I should have had a better plan and a dedicated person to help execute on that plan. Next time I'll do a better job. I definitely think it's an important thing to keep in mind, because obviously, I mean, even if you fail at something, it's a lot more. You get a lot more out of it if you actually record everything that happened and can learn from it. If it's just sort of happens and it didn't go so great and you kind of just sort of pretend that it didn't happen, you're not really learning very much. Looking ahead, I think you can judge a lot of the success. I judge a lot of the success of the event by the fact that we've done things with this technology looking forward, right? We've got a high school intern who's writing teen blogs about how to use 3D processing software. We're talking with a nearby school that has sort of a makerspace of its own to try to come up with what kinds of programs can work for larger groups of students. And we are doing an in-gallery thing for the new Bernini exhibition that's coming up that's going to involve visitors being able to use Wacom tablets to manipulate in 3D clay sculptures as if it was really clay, using models that we created by doing 3D photography. So in summary, sorry, I went a little bit long, your mileage may vary, right? Just because this worked for us doesn't mean it's going to work for everybody. This is Billy Bragg's song I've been thinking about a lot. I paraphrase a little bit. It goes something like, I went out drinking with Calvin James. He said that all innovations are not the same. They're as different as the cultures that give them birth, for no one idea can solve every problem on earth. So don't expect it all to happen in some prescribed institutional fashion. For people are different, and so are museums. You can borrow ideas, but you can't borrow situations. Thank you.
Wow. Well, I'm Liz Neely. I'm from the Art Institute of Chicago, and that was pretty awesome. And we have a great, awesome panel here. And so I'm going to not dig in deep to one topic. What I've done is just trying to look at some projects that I've seen happen at the Art Institute and kind of think about why I think they worked. And I think a lot of it is, so I've come up with a couple themes, and I think it also kind of it overlaps a lot with what is here, and that's why I think maybe that'll lead us into finding out what you've all experienced. I'm going to try not to fall into a Don Undeen voice, though it has been known to happen. Stop it. It has been known to happen, but I'll, because it'll be done poorly, and I wouldn't want to do that to you. So, yes. And this is my Twitter, because I've learned at this conference from multiple people that I must tweet a lot. I guess I do tweet a lot. So anyway, so I thought that this is my, basically I just wanted to use this slide. But this is my observations, because I'm actually talking generally about other people's projects and people that I've talked to around the Art Institute where I've thought something interesting has happened and kind of interviewed them and find out, well, to follow up what's happened, try to think about it more, a little more abstractly. So these are my glowy eyes. Liz is looking upon this. So I think that the idea of space, it was the whole topic of Tim's, and it's come up multiple times, is something that was really something that I thought about when I was kind of looking at some different ideas, and it's also come up a lot. We have the luxury of giving this panel a day and a half in, and I think that for any of you that were at the Educator or EduPunk yesterday, the whole idea of under the radar, of cross-functional. This is something that I think came up in Ignite as well. So informal, something where you can collaborate and low risk. Seems like it's really something to look for now around people to work with and that kind of thing. And so I wanted to kind of just use some examples and tell a little story. And this shows that I know way too much about the program, that I'm making jokes off the program, off of Ed's session. So I've got tales from the blog committee going on here. So I'm on a blog. I'm on a blog committee, and one thing about it, is that it just gets these people together from across functional. We get together, and really, we probably, for the first half an hour, well, we work the whole time, but to my live streaming audience. But for the first half hour, it's a very informal. It's built around coming up with ideas of what we can do in the blog. But we joke around. It's very it's conversational. It is kind of a little bit under the radar. I mean, it's publishing, but it's not expected to be this weighty scholarly publishing. It doesn't have. It's more about getting something fun out there. So I think we get a lot of things done in the name of the blog. I mean, I actually was able to, the picture that Don has in here of 3D printing, I was able to say, oh, we're going to do this because it's the blog, So things like that. We can kind of blame things on the blog to get it to happen, which is why I love the blog. Mm-hmm. And so we've done like charades, we did staff picks videos. So these might not seem crazy, but for us it's not something that we were doing, or it's not something that would necessarily come up for to be done, and some puzzles. And so what I'm really saying, it's not about the blog itself. It's about that committee. It's about that space that where a group of people come together, and they kind of we have a platform that's informal, that's a little under the radar, that we can collaborate and kind of come up with ideas. And just as one side example that I just love is this is up at the top here is Troy Kleiber, and he's our intellectual property lawyer, a very awesome one at that. And I love that he wrote in, this is a bio that he wrote, by day he handles copyright and technology matters, but by night he creates games and puzzles related to the museum's collection. So who, of course, don't we all? And the story behind this is that, so he started writing puzzles for the blog, and he started also, there's this blogger and this fellow in Chicago who's the puzzler. And he started kind of interacting with him and kind of making this relationship. So this also comes back to what Erica was talking about and Don about like starting these relationships with the community, with people out there. So there was this relationship going on. So Troy was making some puzzles through the institution. Was sharing this with the puzzler. The puzzler actually made a puzzle for the Art Institute, mainly for his friends and family. But and then people from the blog committee there was a person from the blog committee that ended up being part of the plants and part of the thing. So it like turned into this kind of thing in this interaction, and then it would get blogged about. And then taking it a step further, something that the blog committee was liking, he was getting really into it. So Troy went off on his own time and kind of made this this choose your own adventure, Escape from Thorn Mansion. So you click through it. It's kind of like a lo-fi kind of game where there's some text instructions and it says, oh, that fireplace looks a little too big. And then you go click on the fireplace, and it leads you to the next room, and you're trying to find things, these letters that go through, and it leads you through the Thorn rooms, I should explain, because not everyone knows, are the miniature rooms in the Art Institute, much beloved. So there's different ones from different time periods. So there could be a French room, and there could be an 18th century American room. And so these go through these different rooms in this Choose Your Own Adventure. So he kind of did this on his own. He brought it back to the committee, and a little ad hoc group was made to design it up like this. So I think that this is really a beautiful evolution of something that was starting to happen, some relationships starting to get noticed, and then actually an ad hoc team getting put together to kind of give it a little polish and get it published out there. And that's one thing that I would really like to see happen more, is that how can we make ad hoc teams to help these ideas really get out there. And in the end, he got Best Digital Tour through a museum collection from the Chicago newspaper. So isn't that crazy? It's great. So the only one downside that I'd really like to think about a little more on this is as I was kind of asking him questions about this and kind of making sure I got the story right for, because I was going to talk about him, I said, one thing that happened out of this is that the director's office got very interested, and actually we ended up coming up with funds to hire the puzzler as a consultant to do puzzles for us. And I just thought this was the coolest thing in the world. Here, this has evolved to hiring the puzzler. And so I chased him down and I said, well, what happened with that? What did we do? What did the puzzler do when he came? Because I never had heard anything after that. And because this is about a year ago, I think. And as it turns out, that when we did get funds to hire the puzzler, but then it kind of got back operationalized, back on the radar. And I think this is something that we talk about a lot too, that now that it has a higher stakes, that there's more evaluation happening of like, well, how best do we use that? How do we, instead of just getting him in there and letting things happen. So I think this is one thing that we also want to watch out for, and that I really want to think about more, is that when things come on, when they come on board and more people get involved, how do we actually keep it sustained and keep it happening and keep that pace of experimentation? So my next kind of concept, which is not really far out there, but every idea needs a champion. And I think again this really came out in all of the in all the talks here, is that this is really a personal investment. And I don't know if you said it explicitly, Erica, but one thing that we talked about a lot is that all this takes a lot of your personal work. I mean. It's really to get those initial prototypes and ideas or something together. It really is personal investment on your own time at home. I mean, it's not easy. It's almost like I I sometimes get a little obsessed, and that's what helps. I mean, so it takes a lot of perseverance. You know, seeing the I'm now getting into Susa's talk here earlier, that seeing the potential things and then, you know, really, you know, taking it to a level where it can be seen by people, and that's going to be on your own time. You can say you don't have time at work; it's not going to happen. But if you get obsessed and it has to happen, you have to find a way. In the talk before this, it was what's the point of a makerspace? And there was a great, I forget which one now who's saying, but it was about, I think it might have been Chris and Mike, that about, you know, making it real, having these weird, strange ideas and making it real. But you have to put the time in to get something together that gets the idea in makes it less abstract. So I guess I wanted to bring up, we have a developer, Matt Norris, and I talked to him. He came up with this idea of doing a digital member card. So something that, you know, we take our information from our development system, and you would have something just on your phone that you could scan and get in the Art Institute. And so, you know, he said he talked to some people at first, and it was a great idea, but, you know, it seemed like it might be hard to and everything. So what he did was, again, kind of on his own, built an alpha prototype, built an implementation plan, and then it kind of like went to different people until he could find people that could help him kind of be advocate for moving forward. And this one is a full success all the way. He said that basically they had 33% of members that had smartphones had already downloaded. I think I got the numbers from it. I don't remember. I'm sorry. But it was a huge amount have actually downloaded this. So this is something that he had an idea, he put in time to do it, built an implementation plan, and then went to different people to kind of see who he could get a voice with and get it out there. So I think that's the kind of thing, is that you have to put in that personal investment to get it into a place where it can really be visualized as something that can happen, and a kind of a plan of what it would take to get there. And then I think this is my last kind of point and observation after talking to all these this fine panel is you know, this sharing, iterating, and celebrating. And this has also come up a lot of that we here at the conference, we're talking to each other. MCN is a very collaborative, kind of sharing kind of place. And I think that that's really what we have to do, because we can iterate and get better within our own institution, but it's also just so much fun and so much faster to iterate off of each other as well, off of each other's experiences. And so, you know, communicate broadly, to document all the success and failure, which we've also talked about, and just be part of a dialogue. Get it out there, and let's all talk about it. And I think that can really push it forward. And this is about building collaborators and support, and that can be collaborators in our community, with the community around us, with the people that are in our institutions as well. So just kind of being, you know, I always liken myself to the traveling salesman, always carrying around the iPad and ready to show it off. And I think I almost did the voice there. I think I almost did. See, it's bad. It's not, I can't do it well. I cannot do it well. It's going to take a lot of practice, and we have a day and a half. So basically, I liken myself as a traveling salesman. Any moment, I'm like, if there's a dead time in a meeting, it's like I bring out the iPad. Hey, did you see what cool thing we did? And certainly, that some people are more receptive to it. I know that that some people are more interested in seeing that kind of thing. But I try not to be annoying about it. But hopefully, it's helping people get excited about things. And then finally, it's showing off. That's the celebrating part. And I've got your blog up here for this one. I mean, I think that this is something that Dale down here at Georgia Cave Museum, they did a experimental project, which they'll be talking about tomorrow at 10:30. At 10:30, where they were 3D imaging using fancy ways that is perfect and scientific. Okay, not so fancy ways. DIY ways to be perfect and scientific. There we go. And I thought it was really brilliant how it was an experiment. They were doing this of the Georgia O'Keeffe House. It was an experiment, and every week it was documented, and there was documentation up there of what worked, what didn't work. And it was really interesting because then it made me aware of something that I wasn't aware of previously, and that this was something that was a possibility out there. So it's not it's not something I have openly happening right now, but if someone asked me about it, then we could iterate on it. And it also adds to this whole 3D picture that is like super exciting. And then matching that up with what Don was doing is that did get, that when they were blogging and when they were tweeting about it, just kind of like thinking about getting this whole picture of like what Dale is doing, what Don is doing, and then really having a better way of iterating that so that we could also like jump on board and start doing this. And I think that this also goes to what you were saying, Erica, about Milwaukee saying, "Oh, can we do it?" Of course, because they're going to do it differently, and you're going to learn something different from it. So I think I guess this is my plug for social media and for conferences is that we can iterate. It's not about we don't want to get caught up in it's not copying. I think that sometimes, because different disciplines are differently, that they would think, oh, well, someone else did it first, so. But we can learn from each other, and let's take it to another level. And I love the way that this looks. It's so pretty, right? And then getting to celebrate, this is something, so we've done some 3D because of what we've learned from you all, and then other people are doing it. And then when you get some success or something, it's great to celebrate it. So I got a call one night that they saw our lion being talked about by Bree, the head of MakerBot at Chicago Ideas, and so we got a picture of it. And so it's great to also get that feedback back, and then also share this with people with people around me, so that we can start seeing that this is getting us attention. It's also something that that we should be thinking about and moving forward. So it helps to show off a little bit, feel good, and then get back at it. So I think those are kind of the top level takeaways I have from experiences, and I kind of just had some questions. We called this Kickstarting Innovation in the Museum, and I think, of course, it's obviously a riff off of Kickstarter, and I often think of so Kickstarter is like a way that gets the ideas out there, and then the crowd decides what's going to get funded or what's not going to get funded. And I just wonder if there's more systematic way that we can get ideas that we can launch our own ideas, that we can find other people in our institution or outside of that we can work with, or if there's structure around it. Or if structure will kill it, maybe it's better to be in this under the radar session and just keep going with our with whatever passion we have at any given time, and run with it and find the ad hoc teams then. So, if we did have a structure within the institution for people to bubble up ideas and make for them to be evaluated, and I think even just saying that out loud, I think, ooh. That might cause some lags and times. Would that institutionalization ruin it? And but I think that also just all these small actions, and I love the story of the evolution of the space from that it was more scrappy exhibitions, and then it kept getting more and more professionalized, and that these small actions. That's still a victory, that they can, make victories, and does that affect not only what we get done in the end, but, how we ourselves and our colleagues just approach the work of the museum, which is really what we're talking about, is that how do we introduce experimental practices and something of trying something new within the museum? So can we nudge it? So I think that's all I have to say, but I think we really want to hear from you all, not necessarily questions, but what have been your experiences? What's worked for you? What hasn't worked? What can get us all beyond the point of that you get frustrated and can just really push it forward? Anyone?
I was going to say ooh. I wanted to sort of wait so that I didn't seem overly anxious, but I've got a couple of questions.
Okay, so here's the deal with questions. We are being live streamed. And that's why the Conan O'Brien, hence the Conan O'Brien moment. So if you could do this, and if you could like strategically either look at the camera,
The dramatic pose.
or do a 3/4 so you're looking at us and the camera.
You got to stand
So
up.
I'll do the initial hi there, and then I'll look at
Okay.
you guys. But in each of these cases, there was what seemed to me to be a theme that I've experienced doing innovative projects also. And so I want to try and describe that and see if I'm reading you all right and see what you think about this. And that is that innovation happens when there's this kernel of a very big idea. You don't know quite how to get there. What you do know is you can see a way to make the first iterative step. And so you say, okay, we don't know exactly what the outcome is going to be. We don't know how fast we can do it, so we don't know what the outputs are going to be. But we can see our way through this week, and at the end of the week, we're going to have this step done. So let's try that. At the end of the week, you say, wow, we did that, and we didn't do that. So let's, you sort of change the next iterative step, and you go again. And pretty soon, after a bunch of iterative steps, you've found your way to energetic, fun, innovative success that is doing things that hadn't been done that way before. And at that point, it gets picked up by the larger institution, and the larger institution really likes it. And they say, wow, we want you to go forward with this. And they institutionalize the process. So suddenly, there are goals, there are objectives, there are outputs, and there are outcome rates that they want it produced at. And it just takes the life out of it. And it just stops dead. Nobody wants to keep doing it because it's not fun anymore.
Yeah.
Can you reflect on that process?
Well, I think one thing that I would say though is there's the flip side of that, which is that ArtGomeLob closed in August, and people keep asking me what's next, and I keep saying, do I want to spend my Christmas vacation on the phone with a group of game designers again this year? I mean, it's really the personal time issue, and so I think it's an interesting question. Is there a way that we can institutionalize that life and that energy and that experimental vibe? Or, on the flip side, is there a way that we can support that kind of personal passion project and initiative so that it stays small, it stays local, but we're carving out space for it, Yeah.
That idea of, I fully agree with Liz's idea that every idea needs a champion, but that idea of the heroism is really dangerous. And I often feel like we have this culture of heroism where the blueprint is that somebody comes up with the idea, they have to fight for it, they get it approved, and then they do all the work, and then they are recognized for it. And it's really, it's a real problem. And there's all kinds of fallout from that. There's burnout, namely. But for another thing, when somebody has that sort of deep investment in an idea, then it becomes impossible to really dialogue about it. It becomes much harder for anybody to say, well, what if we did it this way? And so it's the slippery slope. I mean, on the one hand, well, we couldn't have accomplished any of these things without the champion, and yet it also puts us in a situation that I never want to look at any one of those models and say we need to do this again. We need to emulate that process, And so I don't know the answer. It's like, how do we formalize it without destroying it? Yeah.
Sorry, we don't want to. What? We have another one. We make do. But I also wonder if we leave it in good hands. I mean, if something gets to the point where it's operationalized, it's part of the operation. I think that as people that are kind of in technology, and this is kind of the way we roll. Do I want to be on to the next thing as well, generally? Because I don't know if any of us want to do the same thing over and over again. So if we can get it operationalized so that it actually still has the core reasons why it was good for the mission, and I think that came up a few times too, is that it's not just about having cool ideas or doing things for the sake of doing things. How do they apply to our institutions, and how can we, I mean, I think all of us are committed to coming up with ideas that actually, that we really also passionately think add to our institutions. So if they can be incorporated in, then we kind of naturally also move on to the next thing. So, and I think that, you know, I'm very curious about, because Don is a media lab, and so that's like an experimental lab. So that's a little different than what my job is. I have a lot of operational things. But I wonder if the lab idea really is about, you know, doing, you know, you do one thing, you pilot it, it succeeds or it fails, or you're continuing to iterate. And then at some point, that's either operationalized or it's something in the past, and you kind of move on to the next thing, which is actually pretty fun for most of us, I think, too.
And that kind of segues into my second question, which I initially thought about when Don was speaking, and that is the impact on the mission, the impact on the museum, its audiences, its mission to perpetuate the legacy of its art. What do you think the long tail of your little experiment might be on your institution and its audiences?
That's a good question. I think that probably the answer is something I haven't considered, almost by definition. One of the things that I really liked about that next project that's coming up in the galleries that one of the artists from the hackathon is doing is that I didn't know about it until it was already planned and done, and someone asked me if they could borrow, you know, have us do some photography. I had no idea. This was something that was arranged by education and the curatorial department because they had seen this thing happen, and they came up with their own idea. It's not an idea that I would have thought of. So in a sense, it did operationalize itself, and we fulfilled our mission of exposing people in the museum to some technology and some processes that they weren't familiar with, and they took those kernels of ideas and went with it. And I'll also add that I think we had more advocates than we thought we did. We found advocates in unlikely places who were thinking really creatively and enthusiastically about what could be done with this stuff once it was showed to them in a way that they could understand and connect with. And that was probably the biggest thing that I learned out of that.
Other questions? Or talks or anything to say?
So as an evaluator, I always kind of cringe when people say that evaluation kills innovation or that defining outcomes kills innovation. So it's sort of throwing out to the group. I think that there's a productive way that evaluation can be engaged in a more dynamic, nimble way to help document and capture the successes of innovative projects, as well as in a more systematic way identify what can be improved if it does get institutionalized and operationalized. So thinking maybe outside of the box of the traditional metrics that one might collect on an educational program, to think really where are we trying to push the boundaries here, where do we want to take this, and try to document around that, as opposed to maybe sticking by more standardized learning outcomes or something like that. But I think there is a way that evaluation can be a partner in pushing innovation forward and can help give it some cred within an institution as well.
Yeah, go ahead.
I could comment on that briefly. I mean, I think that one of the mistakes that people make is that they wait until a project is over to evaluate it. And I think that actually building evaluation in from the get-go, and it's something that we've seen in design thinking practices. We saw it in the Tate's presentation yesterday with the Hello Cube project. They actually had, you know, participants who were the likely audience for the project consulting on how the project was designed. And so I think it is about, you know, evaluating and iterating and evaluating and iterating, and that evaluation could actually then be something that fuels innovation.
I'll definitely plead guilty to not having executed on that as well as I could have. I'm heartened by the fact that that was my fault and not the processes or the innovation's fault. I'm pretty confident that next time I'll have a better strategy for doing that kind of documentation. I don't know. I get the documentation part and figuring out what kinds of things do I want to learn from this. I'm not quite sure how I would define metrics for success in advance of something like that, where I said at the outset the goal was to learn about the dynamic and about the process. Maybe success is getting good information about the process and being able to say something meaningful about it. I'm not really sure, but for myself, I was just like so excited to do it that thinking about how the documentation side of it was difficult for me at the time. But having been through it once, I'm pretty sure that the next time is going to be a lot better.
I think it's a really tricky thing too, because I think that there's a point where we're just really experimenting. Then there's a point that it turns into a project, and then there's the point where it gets up. So it's kind of, there are different sections to it, and I think that first section, I know. I think I heard some talks at the Maker Faire, and I'm blanking on the name right now. About how, if we define, if when you're first sitting down, you already know what your goals are, then you're kind of cutting out some of the things. So there's got to be, if we think about this more tinkerer kind of thing, more maker kind of way of looking at it, that I think there's still a stage where you don't know what your goals are, and that you don't even know what you would define, and then evolving into, okay, well, now we think this might be good for this, this, and this, which it might be that the goal, like you said, is let's expose it to our staff so that we can see what they think about it and get a broader idea of what this really means for our institution. Yeah. And so that might be a goal. But I guess I think evaluation and keeping track of what we're doing and knowing where we're going is really important. But I do think that we want to make sure that there is an initial stage where we're just kind of messing around, so that we can kind of get to places that maybe we wouldn't have gotten to if we sat down and planned it from the get-go.
Neil.
I've talked to Don before about digital humanities centers and university research centers as places for innovation. Do any of you also look to places like Harvard Meta Lab or MITH in Maryland, or the Center for History and New Media at George Mason, or King's College Lab, did these digital research centers that are operating within complex institutional structures, but that are creating entirely new systems of knowledge?
Any of us looked at that?
I don't have anything.
Yeah, I mean, I could say that, I follow, yeah. I definitely follow a lot of those places on Twitter and keep track, but especially in the publishing realm or digital publishing realm. But as far as like getting to a deeper collaboration, I think a lot of us are kind of getting things from more closer from our community. I would really like to, and I think that a lot of what I'm looking at is we have a School of the Art Institute, so kind of looking at that and talking to some people, and definitely the 3D printing was done with partners from the School of the Art Institute, but actually thinking about leveraging that a little more. So, but certainly that would be, depending on what the project is and what they're doing, as far as official partnerships, I'm sure it would be awesome.
I mean, I would just add, I've been to that camp twice, like in the Bay Area, and what's amazing about those communities is that they're dealing with the same issues that we're dealing with, and so partnerships can be actual collaboration, or it could just be coming together and talking more about strategy.
Right, and you all are working with Stanford on design thinking, so that's really pushing forward, and they're thinking about what you're doing, and you're thinking about what they're doing. So, I mean, there's definitely university partnerships going on, but not necessarily in the digital humanities per se. Yeah. Who's got the mic?
I do.
Oh, she wants it. Okay.
I'm really glad you brought up the point about evaluation, because I completely agree that evaluation is actually really integral to innovation. One case, and I actually also think that one needs to recast what we think of as evaluation. I think evaluation doesn't just have to be about statistics. It can be something as simple as bringing a really low-fi, low-risk prototype to the floor and just kind of putting it out there and putting it on the ground and just kind of seeing how people react to it, and then going back and iterating and going back out the next day and trying a new version of whatever it is you're doing. And also the importance of just observing, just seeing the kind of patterns that are happening in the galleries or whatever kind of space that you work in. And one case in point is I'm Stephanie Powell, and I work at the Museum of Modern Art and formerly worked at SFMOMA. And one thing that our department is actually going through right now is an entire rethinking of all of our interpretive strategies, and that includes thinking about how we do mobile interpretation, how do we do live interpretation, and one case in point is that, all along through this process, this woman named Jackie Armstrong, who was our Landau Fellow, who focuses completely on evaluation, has been completely pivotal to this process, because every time we have an idea, what we do is we just try it, and then she's there to actually observe and see us, take notes and observe and perhaps do a quick follow-up survey, and then that information is so valuable because it gives us on the fly this real picture of how our ideas are actually translating to the public. So thank you for bringing that point up. I think it's really important.
It's like you have some people right behind you.
Hello? Okay. I actually I want to talk a little bit about institutionalizing and heroism a bit. Partially because I think that's such a great word, heroism. And but I think one of the things that I think we need to watch out for in trying to make our institutions more innovative is that we tend to look at that process of institutionalizing, I think, as a malicious one. We're like, oh, I have great ideas and the institution is going to kill them if it gets outside. But it's like Don said, he said, when I talk to everyone wants it to be great. So I don't know where actually that malice comes from. And so that institutionalizing is really more of a process of erosion, right? Where it's like, we had a great idea, but as soon as you have 18 people involved with it, each of whom has a slightly different approach to the problem, it's really easy for it to suddenly become sort of that lowest common denominator and get bland very quickly. So I sort of feel like the heroism is actually important there. Like it's almost like the heroism is great, but maybe we apply it less towards getting the project done as much as to making sure that when it's rolled out more widely, that it keeps that essential character that made it so wonderful to you in the first place. And I think that's something that we try to do at DAM, to varying degrees of success, as everybody does. But that's something that we thought was really great when it was just a couple of us thinking about it, stays great, even when a bunch of people are involved.
I totally agree. I think by heroism, I think maybe a little less Superman and a little more A-Team. Right, like you need to have, you gotta let lots of people be heroes and not just like the one guy, right? You need the explosives expert and the ninja and the face man to make it all happen. Of course you can.
Oh, that's
A-Team didn't have a ninja. What am I talking about?
Well, this is going to sound super nerdy off on the heels of that. I swear this is pertinent to what Kovin just said, but earlier when Liz was talking, and both Liz and Erica talking about this idea of copying, the idea of can I use that idea, and kept making me think of this quote from George Bernard Shaw. He said, if I have an apple and I give it to you, now you have an apple. But if I have an idea and I give it to you, now we both have an idea. And I think that it's in the nature of of ideas that it's never the same. You know, once we both know about it, there are two ideas. And so I thought that kept coming up for me when I was listening to each person present. But then what Kovin just mentioned, that idea that you've got something brilliant, and once 18 people are involved in it, this is the refraction that's occurring, is that you have 18 different versions of 18 instances of the idea, and that's part of what is slowing it down. People connect the project to their own agendas, or that they have that each person has some deep underlying goals that they're always working toward, and if the project can be kind of mutated to support that mission, then that's what they'll attempt to do, and it's a perfectly honest and respectable thing that that each of them is doing. But it's also going to bog, it can potentially bog the idea down.
I do like the idea that evaluation is being brought up, and this question of evaluation. I think one of the things that we run into, or at least that I've run into, being on both sides of that equation. I've been the evaluator, and then I've also been, had my programs evaluated and been an educator. And I think one thing that I've run into is the issue of how not just we as the people who do the programs are thinking about evaluation, but also how the leadership at the museum is thinking about evaluation. And I think that there does need to be sort of a sea change in terms of how they think about what success is. Because I think the thing that I've often run into is what I consider success may be that only 15 people show up for this program, but it's 15 people that have an awesome time. But trying to convince the leadership that 15 people is great is sometimes hard. And so trying to think about new ways of not just utilizing evaluation as a part of the iterative process, but also having to kind of recast what evaluation is and what we're evaluating, how we think about success, and how leadership thinks about success, to bring it back from the kind of precipice of like, it's all about how many people show up. And that it becomes more about quality rather than quantity.
It's really interesting.
Jonathan, do you have a question? Pass the mic. Go for it.
I was just going to say, so Thomas Lasola, who was a museum theorist, talks about, it is on? No, hello? Okay, so Solar talks about the fact that it's actually really difficult for museums to innovate. This was back in the 90s, he was talking about innovation, that it's really difficult for museums to innovate because actually our audiences don't want us to change. And I'd like to know what you think about that.
I would say, I have something. So just kind of using my case study to reflect on that, what I found with ArtGomeLob was that the traditional museum audience really didn't care that the project existed, but there was a brand new audience of gamers who were so excited to use the museum as a game board and were so excited to see their community and their medium being taken seriously and their set of concerns being reflected in this kind of high-level dialogue, and that there was a real hunger for that kind of dialogue and for that kind of platform. And so I think that it's not so much about us innovating and trying to drag our traditional audiences along with us on the path to innovation, but using innovation as a way to attract different audiences and different communities who aren't as involved in the museum.
I also don't know I think our audiences is kind of a broad term too, because of course we have many different audiences, and sure, some wouldn't want it to change, but I know, just thinking to, putting these 25 iPads in the European Decorative Arts galleries whose visitors are, to the European Decorative Arts Galleries, and people just, everyone that's walked by, we haven't done a formal thing yet because it just went live, but people that walk by are just so excited to see something new, and I think people love new things. So I think there are audience, but I guess I would be curious to you, do you think you can categorize a audience as one, monolithic group? I don't think so. Can
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. Yesterday in the social media success session, we were talking about these additional audiences that are coming up because of online. So rather than having, you've got your traditional researchers who we know use resources, and you've got your, traditional museum audiences, which again, I agree is not necessarily the case. But then there's this additional group of people who are using museum resources online that don't necessarily want to come to the museum. They're also not researchers, as in traditional scholars, but they're this whole other group. And it's interesting that a lot of these sorts of projects seem to be appealing to, I want to say, a whole other group. Like, not all of them, but they're like ArtGomeLob it's sort of finding a new space for new people rather than, I suppose, just changing the space for the people who already come and are happy with what the offering is.
Well, I think we are past overtime, actually. Oh, what, did you have something? But if you had something,
Yeah.
we would take it if you have something. We never let go of a gig.
Yep. So I was interested in seeing, it seems like a lot of the innovation starts with, a person who's inside the museum who has this great idea, maybe because they were meeting with friends and saw some new technology and they wanted to play around with it and see how it applied. And that was like one way of, and then you would like try and invite other people, and one of the most amazing outcomes is when someone who's completely outside that group proposes the idea to the museum. So I was wondering if anyone's worked with visitor services at all to have an open communications path that's not just like, hey, we're going to prompt. I think the prompting of like, okay, we're going to do ArtGomeLob, like that's good because it has some sort of focus to it, but in general, to make our visitors aware that they can affect change within the museums if they really want to, and like who do they talk to inside so that like we can partner them up with the right people. If someone has a great educational idea, if someone has a app that they wanted to make, and we see this more with developers and mobile development where they'll make an app and they'll bring it to you and you'll be like, this is great, we should just push it out. How do we, is that one way where we won't have to rely on quote unquote heroes within the museum to actually push innovation forward?
So are you saying that, like, how could we have channels to allow, to kind of get this stuff in there and partner with people who have already been champions?
Yeah, like people will communicate like via blogs. They'll comment on, if they see something that they like, they'll comment on it and try and get involved. But I don't know, I just feel like enabling the average visitor to think that they can design an exhibition or take an unused space. If they had this idea, like, wouldn't it be cool if this corner had something going on? But that's just like, oh, that's a cool idea, and they don't realize that they should be talking to us to make that happen, right? How do we make it make us more accessible?
Well, I think at least our social media presences actually allow people to, they do give people a space to at least voice their opinions, and I think that's been a really important revolution in that people do have a forum for saying what they think, and they might not be aware of how much we listen, but we do actually listen. We do pay attention to what people are. If someone says, I wish they would do this, or I wish they wouldn't do this, then we are aware of it. I mean, there are a number of channels. That idea of design of a member of the public designing an exhibition or something. I mean, it's hard to figure out how do we make something like that happen when the one of the problems that we're identifying is like, how does a person, a lone individual in the employment of the museum have bring an idea into fruition. So there's a bit of a leap there, but I do feel like museums are listening to their public in a brand new way, and in ways that we didn't have the capacity to do. We didn't have the tools to do that 10 years ago.
I guess I would just add one more thing. I mean, there's this idea of kind of an institutional voice or institutional production values or institutional production standards, and I think that we're at a point right now where those notions are kind of evolving and expanding, and you have the idea of institutional voices or kind of a range of production values. You have institutions producing Skype videos in addition to producing kind of formally lit interviews that are more TV style. And so I think that it's more about expanding that range and creating containers that those voices and those ideas can reside inside. But there is still a standard that you have to adhere to. I mean, most of my budget for ArtGomeLob was spent on graphics and exhibition design to make the crowdsourced games look polished so that they would be taken seriously by a more conventional, traditional museum visitor. So I think there's a balance, but I think that we are starting to create those containers.
Well, great. I think we are way long out of time, but let's hear it for this great panel.